everyone, my name is Kara. I work here at the Quogue Wildlife Refuge as an educator and program coordinator, and I'm really excited to bring you all on a virtual hike of the Quogue Wildlife Refuge. So the refuge was established in 1934, and we'll talk a little bit about the history of the refuge and some cool facts as well as the habitats before we go on our hike. And then during the hike, we'll chat a lot about the different types of wildlife and fauna and flora that you can find here at the refuge. So the Quogue Wildlife Refuge is a 305-acre nonprofit nature preserve. We are named after the town that we're in, so we're in the town of Quogue, which is kind of right between West Hampton and Southampton on the South Fork of Long Island. But the picture that you're looking at right now on your screen is a photo of Old Ice Pond in the late summer. So that's the main pond that we have on site at the refuge. It is a 10-acre pond, and we'll be hiking around Old Ice Pond today on the Green Trail. So, our mission at the refuge is to serve as responsible land stewards of the property, its natural resources, and promote, implement, and support environmental education. So, we do a lot of guided hikes in person at the refuge. We offer full moon night hikes during every season and mostly every month. And then we offer special programs throughout the year. And as a nonprofit, we also do fundraising events, and you can become a member of the refuge to support our mission. So 100 years ago, before the refuge was the Quogue Wildlife Refuge, it was the site of the Quogue Ice Company. So the Quogue Ice Company harvested ice on Old Ice Pond and also in the creek at Ferrydale, which we'll talk a little bit more about. And then when refrigerators were invented in the 1920s, the property wasn't used for ice harvesting anymore. And then in the 1930s and late 1920s, it was being used to raise and rear American black ducks and waterfowl. And since that time, it's been a wildlife refuge. And here's a mural that's in our ice harvesting exhibit of what it looked like 100 years ago when they were harvesting ice on Old Ice Pond. And the biggest building that you see in the picture was the ice house. So it was a 3-story ice house. Around our animal cages is still the foundation for the ice house that you see in the mural. And then the smaller building that you can see right underneath the conveyor belt is where we're going to check out actually in a little bit. It's our ice harvesting exhibit, and that building housed the steam engine that drove the conveyor belt to bring ice up into the ice house. So it's really fascinating history that happened here on our property. And the ice could last up to two to 3 years in an ice house. And there were no windows. There was really good drainage for the meltwater, so the ice chunks weren't sitting in the meltwater, and all that meltwater would drain off. The chunks of ice were actually really big. They could be up to 100 pounds a chunk, and that was great because it was very good insulation for each other. They were usually then covered with hay or sawdust and stored in that building. So we're going to talk a lot about the history of the refuge, which is very interesting. And again, established in 1934 as the Southampton Township Wildfowl Association. But their main mission, the group that founded the Quogue Wildlife Refuge, was to protect the resource. They were actually hunters and waterfowl hunters that wanted to protect the resource of the black ducks, mallards, and geese that they were hunting. They noticed that the population of those animals was declining in the 1930s. And there was a lot of different reasons why, but there were some really bad winters that unfortunately the population of ducks and geese weren't getting enough food in the ponds, in the local waterways. So their group came together and they broke the ice here at the refuge. They fed the ducks thousands of tons of grain and potato mixture, and then they banded them for science and raised them. So they raised, I think, and released up to 10,000 ducks over the time that they were here, and then the Quogue Wildlife Refuge began from their efforts. So here's photos from probably the 1940s of black ducks and mallards being banned, and then the ice had to be kept open for the birds so that they could find enough food. So the STWA was formed with 45 charter members, and all of them were from this town of Southampton. And we still have a trophy that was won based on off of their conservation efforts. It was won in a nationwide conservation contest. So some really great beginnings to the Quogue Wildlife Refuge. And today we are still a wildlife refuge, of course. So the 305 acres of the preserve is just for wildlife. So we don't allow any hunting or fishing. We don't allow dogs on the trails or bicycles, so we try to have the lowest impact on the habitat, and everything is left for wildlife. So we see lots of ducks and geese in the wintertime. Throughout the different seasons, we'll see different types of animals, migratory, but also native animals that just live here, and amazing different habitats that you can see when you visit. So our nature center building is the one that overlooks Old Ice Pond. It was built in 1971, and we have some exhibits inside as well as our offices. And then we take care of more animals that unfortunately were, some of them were people's pets that they couldn't take care of any longer, or some of them were wildlife that are permanently injured. So we do have lots of different hiking trails. All of our blaze trails, or the colors, are loops. So if you follow the red trail, which is the longest, it's 3.1 miles, but it ends at the same location that it begins. So that's true for all of our trails. And we have three different freshwater ponds on the main site of the refuge. So Deer Pond is the highest north, and then they get bigger as you go southward, but all of that fresh water leads into each other. Old Ice Pond is the one that we're going to hike around today, and that's the green trail. So the green trail is about a mile long, really great trail. And all of our trails, we try to maintain they're nice and wide so that you won't really brush up against the plants. But just like anywhere on Long Island, ticks are a concern if you come and visit. So just have that in mind. And it's always good to do a tick check anywhere you go on the island. And then on this map, you can see to our south and across the railroad is Quantuck Creek. All of the fresh water from our ponds on the main property drain into Quantuck Creek, where it's more brackish water. And Quantuck Creek is where the Fairy Dell Boardwalk is. So we're also going to do that on our hike today. So the refuge is open every single day from sunrise to sunset. It's always free to visit, and you can come visit us in the fall and the winter, which are beautiful months to visit, always something new to see. And when it snows, we actually rent cross-country skis, so you can come down and rent some cross-country skis and use them out on the trails, which is always really fun. And then later, we're going to go to the Fairy Dell Boardwalk, which is a very different habitat than the main property. It is a tidal wetland, so you'll see lots of different plants and different species of animals at the Fairy Dell Boardwalk. And then before we get started, these are some photos of some resident animals that we take care of. So most of the reptiles that you see on the screen, the tortoises and the snake, those were people's pets that they couldn't take care of anymore. But the box turtle, as well as the hawks, owls, the fox, and our wild turkey and possum, those were animals that unfortunately were injured in the wild, and they were permanently injured. So unfortunately, all of those animals can't find their own food on their own out in the wild, and that's why we have them. So we take care of them, we provide them with enrichment and food every day, and without them, without human care, they wouldn't survive. So that's why we take care of those animals, and you can visit them in our outdoor wildlife complex. But again, the nature preserve is really big, and especially in terms of Long Island preserves. So we see lots of different wildlife, native wildlife that's supposed to be here and could be migratory, or they could live here all year round and adapt to our conditions. But these are some animals that we've seen recently: the silver-haired bat on a tree out in front of the nature center just resting, and then a white-tailed deer, of course, wood ducks, and lots of insects, which is good for other animals and for people to see. The giant leopard moth caterpillar was a really cool find. And then these are some more animals that have been seen on the pond or above the pond. old ice pond, so the northern rough-winged swallow, and then we had some Canada geese and some goslings that were born in springtime or early springtime. We see bald eagles over the pond and largemouth bass in the pond. So again, we don't allow any hunting or fishing, but we did see this pair of largemouth bass spawning in a nest, which was really cool. All right, so let's go for a hike. This is a video of the green trail. And we're going to start right where you would enter the preserve. This is our entrance booth. And on that table right there, the green table, which is usually out, you can get a trail map. You can get some of our newsletters and some materials that have articles on the inside. And then this is the ice harvesting exhibit that I was telling you all about. This is the building that was the housing for the steam engine. Inside of it now are some of the old tools that were at the refuge and some of the old tools that were used in the ice harvesting. So right down there, that concrete block is where the steam engine was. But it was a really big effort to harvest ice from the pond. It took a lot of power from horses and people. And then, of course, the delivery was a whole nother aspect of ice harvesting. People would get a chunk delivered. They would actually usually have a sticker, or not a sticker, but a cardboard piece in the window that told the iceman how many pounds of ice they wanted delivered. And then once the ice was delivered, they put it in the ice box. So here on, right when you walk into the refuge, on your left is Old Ice Pond, and on your right are our animal enclosures. So right here is where the ice was brought into the 3-story ice house. That the animal enclosures, the foundation right here was where that building stood. And then now we have our permanently injured wildlife that need human care to survive. This is our possum. He was walking around, so I wanted to show you all what he was up to. So he's walking around there. And unfortunately, he's non-releasable because he was missing his tail. Possums have a prehensile tail that unfortunately for that guy, he was brought to a wildlife rehab and he didn't have his tail. So they deemed him non-releasable. So this is our old ice pond, which is beautiful. It did look very different in the early 1900s. There were no islands out on the pond, and that is because those were added after the Southampton Township Wildfowl Association began, and all those islands on the pond are nesting islands for ducks and geese. So that was our big trail map, but this is our butterfly garden, which is just behind the animal enclosures. There are native plants in the butterfly garden to attract different types of insects and native butterflies and provide them with nectar. This is called milkweed, this plant, and it is the host plant for monarch butterflies. Without that plant, they can't complete their life cycle. So the butterfly will lay eggs on the milkweed. The caterpillars will hatch, eat the leaves, and then they'll turn into a monarch butterfly after hatching from their chrysalis. I actually have a monarch butterfly right here to show you guys. And then as you walk through the butterfly garden, there are hummingbird feeders that we put up and maintain. So for some more pollinators to come through, as well as some mason bee houses right over here. And those are really beneficial insects as well. To the right of the butterfly garden, when you exit this way, is a restroom before you use the trail, and a compost pile so that we can kind of turn some of the things that the animals don't eat into soil. But when we start the trail on the green trail, it is through this really wide clearing. And lots of different habitats here at the refuge. Our preserve is in the Pine Barrens on Long Island, which is a really special habitat. So the Pine Barrens is one of the largest habitats on Long Island, and the main trees that grow in the Pine Barrens are the pitch pine. Then you have scrub oak and different types of oaks, and also other deciduous trees, which means that they lose their leaves in the fall. When we start the trail, On the green trail, it is really nice and wide and open. There are some evergreen trees as well when we hike the green trail. So we'll talk about some of the different trees and animals that we might see on the trail. But as we begin, one of the first things you might notice is to our right, there are some honeybee hives. So we have over 30 hives that a beekeeper maintains here at the refuge. That clearing is coming up to the right. And it's really important that we have bees. Will actually collect the honey at the end of the year, but the honeybee hives are great because honeybees will help pollinate some of the plants in the forest. So blueberries, inkberries, there are lots of different berries here at the refuge that honeybees will help pollinate. And there are other native bees too. There's actually in New York State, there's lots of different species of bees, not just honeybees. And honeybees are actually not native, they're from Europe and Asia, but they are the only bee that makes honey. So, this habitat, which is off the green trail through this little sandy section, is called the field. And it's very open. It was originally opened in the 1950s to be a habitat for geese. So, they really wanted to attract waterfowl. The houses that you see are great for insect eating birds. So the white one that we just kind of saw in front of us is for purple martins, which is a type of swallow. And then at the back of the field, we have eastern bluebird houses. And then the other houses that were behind us, they looked like gourds. Those are for tree swallows. But because this habitat is very open and it's a little bit hotter because without the canopy of the shade from the larger trees, it grows some very cool plants. So right below us is the prickly pear cactus. This cactus is Long Island's only native cactus. Right now it's flowering. So you can see that beautiful yellow flower at the top of the screen. It was being pollinated by a bee or an insect. And then that green fruit, it just looks like a tiny piece of on the top of the cactus there is the prickly pear. So that's the fruit of the prickly pear cactus. And it is Long Island's only native cactus. It holds water inside of the pad, but it is very good food for turtles that will come, box turtles that might come and eat the fruit. We see lots of box turtles in this habitat. They are a turtle that's declining, unfortunately, in our area because there's not as much habitat as there used to be for them. Then as you continue through the field, we'll usually see lots of animal tracks in the sand, sometimes deer, sometimes we'll see raccoon or turkey tracks. But the habitat really starts to change, and it does look a lot like the rest of the main property of the refuge, which is kind of perfect Pine Barrens habitat. So we'll start to see a lot more pine needles on the ground and pine trees. And then there is a significant shrub layer or understory underneath the really tall canopy, which we'll see scrub oak, high bush and low bush blueberry, huckleberry, sheep laurel. And then following the green trail, we're getting closer to the fresh water. So fresh water is really important in a habitat. We're going to cross the bridge going on the green trail, but fresh water is really important for lots of different things, both animals and for plants. And here at the refuge, all of our ponds on the main property are freshwater, which means that they're groundwater fed, but also rainwater fed. So the pond to our left is just a tiny little offshoot of Old Ice Pond, but we call it Lily Pad Pond. There are lots of lily pads and they were blooming, but this is a great spot for snapping turtles. Can you see the shell of the snapping turtle there? His head was underwater, just slightly underwater. But snapping turtles, painted turtles, those are some reptiles that live in the pond. Other amphibians would use a pond like this one, especially to lay their eggs in the springtime. So frogs and salamanders. It's a great spot to lay them because it is it only comes out in the spring. So it's kind of ephemeral. It just comes out in the spring when there's a lot of rain. There's not as much predators in a pond like that for frogs to lay their eggs. So hiking on the green trail is really great. You see a lot of different trees like maples, um, uh, and sassafras. Those are some smaller deciduous trees that you might see along the way. And at the bridge is another good spot to look for reptiles. So sometimes we'll see snapping turtles in the pond and painted turtles in the pond by the bridge. Some of the different fish that you might see are largemouth bass, bluegilled sunfish, pumpkin seed sunfish, catfish, and the American eel. So this is a beautiful spot again. And looking northward, which we're turning to now, turning to the right, is North Pond. So it flows together in a small stream. And then to the left is the main pond, Old Ice Pond. So, and then along the edges of the pond here and through the habitat that we're going to keep walking are some rarer plants. So because we're so close to fresh water, the habitat that we're going towards is called a bog. And a bog is usually acidic, but there usually is a lot of moss underneath. It's like a big sponge. So a bog, sometimes you might hear cranberry bog as well. I did want to take a second to pause. This was some scat that I found on the trail. It looks to me like it was from a raccoon. So it looks like a raccoon was walking on the bridge at night and then left some evidence behind. I thought that was kind of cool to check out. So here's the bog. Again, bogs are like a big sponge. They soak up water and have some rarer plants that grow. So there are cranberries that grow in this bog, just like in other places on the island, and other plants that are carnivorous. So the one that we're looking at right now, the one that has, you can see the veins and it looks like hairs, that's called a pitcher plant. And the hairs face downward. So a bug will go into the plant and take a sip of water, but get stuck in the sticky water. The hairs also keep them trapped there. And then the plant will metabolize the bug. So they are kind of like a Venus flytrap, except they're passive. They don't try to catch the bug. They are carnivorous, but they'll wait there for the bug. It's kind of cool. And this is one of my favorite parts of the trail, when you get to see all of these really big pitch pine trees. Pitch pines are the main pine of the Pine Barrens. And then to your left and right, the shrubs that we're walking past are called inkberry. And inkberry has a shiny, waxy leaf. They're in the holly family. So their genus is the same. It's Ilex or Ilex. But as you walk this way, you can see inkberry is growing fairly close to some of the blueberries that we have. So we don't allow picking of any type at the refuge or collecting. So no collecting berries or picking leaves. And there is good reason. It's great for the animals that live here. But also because inkberry can make our stomachs upset if we were to eat the berry, which looks similar to blueberry. But the Pine Barrens is called that because it has one type of tree really that grows throughout the main ecosystem, and that's the pine tree. But the barrens part of the name refers to just that the habitat doesn't have a lot of food for animals to eat. So here's some inkberry up close. You can see it has that waxy leaf. So when there is food for animals in the form of berries, blueberry, acorns, those are really important because some of the pines don't produce as much food for animals as another type of tree would, so like a oak tree. But here's the berry of the inkberry. It is the same shape as a blueberry, but it's a little bit darker. It doesn't have the powdery substance on the outside, and it doesn't have the flower imprint on the bottom. So that's one way that you can tell. And then here's a blueberry. So you can see they're very close to each other. And there's a blueberry right at the top of this high bush blueberry. But again, very important for nesting birds, and that are, in the preserve, and this is one of the only things that they can eat. So some of the animals that you can see when you hike at the refuge, and we did talk a little bit about reptiles, amphibians, and fish, but in terms of mammals, some animals that you can see evidence of, we mentioned raccoons, but possums can eat blueberries like the ones that we're looking at here, especially when they fall to the ground. Possums are mammals just like raccoons, and possums are really great. They are nocturnal, but they'll walk through the forest and get ticks on their body. And a possum, just one possum, can eat up to 5,000 ticks off of their fur in a season. So that's pretty amazing. Possums are great to have around. But wild turkey also love the Pine Barrens. They eat ticks too. And this is scrub oak that we're looking down at. Above the scrub oak is sorry that it might be a little blurry, but that's scarlet oak. Like we have white oaks and scarlet oaks. And then, of course, white-tailed deer we'll see at the refuge, which are very common on Long Island, but it's nice to see them in the habitat where they are supposed to be. And then as we continue, and over the winter time, it was a little bit easier to see animal tracks. So we had a lot of snow, and you were able to see tracks of red fox. So lots of red fox on the trails or around the area. And here is, you may have seen this in your own backyards. It's called an oak apple gall. You can see it kind of looks like an apple, but what it is a gall. And that just means that the tree has grown around a wasp egg. So a gall wasp look like flying ants. They'll actually lay their eggs and or deposit their eggs on a tree. The tree doesn't know what to do. It grows around the egg, and then the wasp baby will hatch. So you can look for galls on the trails. But we did talk about pitch pine trees. This is a beautiful pitch pine. Again, they're very tall. They have this bark that's very thick. Some animals can get through the bark, though. This is the holes from a yellow-bellied sapsucker. Yellow-bellied sapsucker holes are in a straight line, so that's how you can tell. These are sap wells made by that woodpecker. And pine trees will release pine needles. You'll see them a lot on the trails at the refuge, but also pine cones. So here's a needle that I wanted to show you. It has 3 needles in a cluster, and that's how you can tell it's from a pitch pine. So 1, 2, 3. I like to remember it as like a pitchfork, right? 3 needles in a cluster. And then the pine cones house the seed for the pines. So in the inside of a pine cone, there are seeds to grow a new tree, but sometimes animals chew them. That's what I wanted to show you here. So the chewed up pine cone was chewed by a squirrel most likely, but also possibly another rodent like a chipmunk or a mouse. They'll kind of chew on those pine cones. So the Pine Barrens is adapted to forest fires. So that means that if there was a forest fire, and here's another pine tree, this is the white pine tree. But if there was a forest fire and the trees did burn, some pine cones will only open up after a forest fire. That's called serotiny or a serotinous pine cone. White pines are not as adapted to the fire, but pitch pines are. So if a forest fire knocked down the pitch pines, some of them will be able to regrow just from the roots. And then of course from the pine cones. But their bark is so thick, if it was a small forest fire, they would be able to survive. So on the edge of the pond is a plant called purple loosestrife that turns beautiful colors in the fall. And we hear a lot of bullfrogs, green frogs, fowlers, toads. Snakes we do have on Long Island are really cool to see, but on Long Island we don't have any venomous snakes. We used to have the timber rattlesnake, but that was extirpated or hunted out of our area in the 1900s. So the timber rattlesnake, bobcats, bear, wolf, all those animals were extirpated or hunted out of Long Island. fun tree to look for is this one. This is called a sassafras tree. It used to be root beer used to be made from sassafras, but it has 3 different types of leaves: a regular leaf, a mitten leaf, and a dinosaur footprint shaped. This trail actually is the trail that dammed Old Ice Pond. So in the 1900s and 1913, earth was built up on this trail to hold in the water to Old Ice Pond. But we're so close to the water that turtles come out, they come onto this trail, and they lay their eggs. These are some eggshells from turtles, eggs that hatched out of the nest right over here, and usually they're just a shallow depression. Those to me look like painted turtle eggshells. But as you continue down the dam trail, there's some really beautiful plants. This is called soap bush. It will bloom and it smells really great. They have white flowers. It's just about to bloom. And on the other side, at the end of the dam trail, is where there's a spillway. So when the water gets too high, it will come over the spillway, go under our feet where we're standing, and out into the creek or into Chocolate Pudding Pond, which we call Chocolate Pudding Pond. But here is Old Ice Pond. And then below us is the spillway. And on Long Island, there are more saltwater habitats than freshwater. So this is very important for wildlife, especially the shallow areas. We'll see different types of insects, lots of dragonfly species, which are amazing to see, insect species. And then this is a great spot to look for migrating birds in the springtime and in the fall when they're making their way back towards their wintering grounds, maybe in the south of the US or South America. And down here is Chocolate Pudding Pond. So we call that Chocolate Pudding Pond because as the leaves fall into the water, the tannins break down and look a lot like mud or chocolate pudding. So it's a kind of a swampy, freshwater swampy area. Down here, we've seen frogs, snapping turtles, raccoons washing their hands. I've seen a muskrat in Chocolate Pudding Pond too. Lots of different animals. And then because we're so close to the water, a very cool wildflower grows on the edge of the boardwalk. It's called skunk cabbage. You can see the big green leaf right here from skunk cabbage. In the wintertime, it looks very different. It looks like a pod. But in the summertime, it grows these huge green leaves. When you break them, it smells like skunks. It doesn't smell very good. But some animals like to eat skunk cabbage, especially Canada geese. They'll walk into this area and start eating the leaves. And we're back at the Nature Center, very close to where we started. This is our Nature Center building right here. And on our website, we have the posted hours you can check out, overlooking Old Ice Pond. So that was just almost a little over, under a mile of the trails. We have other trails if you combine them all. We have 7 miles of trails. There's the ice harvesting exhibit parking lot, and then across the street we go to the Fairy Dell Boardwalk. So it is part of the Quogue Wildlife Refuge, but it's across the train tracks. So we can head over there together to the Fairy Dell Boardwalk. So right where that white car is parked is where you can park if you wanted to, or you can walk from the main property. It's probably a minute walk, but you'll see the black gates. You can walk right into the Fairy Dell Boardwalk. Here we have the same guidance: no dogs, no smoking, and no bicycles on the boardwalk. So I just wanted to show you what the entrance looks like. Oops. And when you walk the boardwalk, it is very different habitat. So it's called the Fairy Dell Boardwalk. In the early 1800s or 1900s, the Fairy Dell Boardwalk was actually, the Fairy Dell Boardwalk in the 1800s wasn't here. It was just the stream that flowed from Old Ice Pond into Quanta Creek. So it looked kind of like this more in the 1800s and the 1900s. It was Fairy Dell refers to a bowered over tree tunnel with lots of green trees. So that's what it looked like on the stream. I think it would look a lot like to this habitat when you walk into the boardwalk with lots of ferns, a lot of different plants that grow near water. So this is a cinnamon fern, but there are other types of ferns at the refuge as well, like ostrich fern. And then other trees like the pines, of course, as you see. And then there are some wildflowers right where the boardwalk splits. But the part that's called fairy dell just is referring to how it was viewed as a magical place for people that came to visit in the summers during the 1800s and 1900s. There's a lot of history at the Fairy Dell Boardwalk, and the refuge was is very grateful to the Robert David Lyon Gardner Foundation for the grant that helped us restore the boardwalk. It was dilapidated in the early 2000s, and then after Hurricane Sandy had to be closed, but it was rebuilt and opened in 2018. And then some other plants that grow at the boardwalk are the eastern red cedar. Those were the berries from the cedar. Those are really great for birds. They love to eat the red cedar berries, especially cedar waxwings. But the habitat looks very different now. After the Montauk Highway Bridge, um, there was a dam there, and once that was taken out, there were federal regulations that didn't allow them to have the dam in place. And um, so when that when that dam was removed from the Montauk, in between Quantuck Creek by Montauk Highway, there was more salt water that came in from the bay. And the saltwater intrusion caused a lot of that tree tunnel, the green trees in the early 1900s, to die. There are still some across the creek, but this plant that you see is actually called Phragmites, and it grows along marshes throughout all of Long Island. So this plant wouldn't have been there in maybe in the late 1800s, but it was accidentally brought over from Europe and Asia in ship ballasts, and then it has spread across North America. It is considered invasive. So the creek does look very different. It is brackish water, so it's a mix of fresh water and salt water, but still very important for wildlife. So you across the creek, you can see there are some great egrets that are in the water and then sitting up in a tree roosting. There was a belted kingfisher that was flying down the creek and looking for fish to eat. We see lots of fish, a lot of crabs, a lot of different wildlife in the tidal wetland. And then you can see evidence of when there were more trees on this side of the creek by the tree stumps that are both on the edge and in the main water here. So you can put a kayak in Quantuck Creek. We don't allow private boats on the pond that we hiked around just before on Old Ice Pond, but there is a point that you can put them right off of the road here on Old Country Road. And then the boardwalk ends in terminal platforms. And you can see as you walk the other side of the platform, where we are now, this is a tupelo tree. So it has this beautiful bark that's supposed to look like alligator skin. The branches of the tupelo tree grow in 90 degrees, so straight out. And they're one of the first trees to lose their leaves in the fall, but they turn these beautiful colors. So I noticed actually there were some leaves already falling in late July, but you can definitely come and see at the end of August, some of the tupelo will be turning beautiful autumn colors if you're ready to get autumn started. But the history of the Fairy Dell and Quantuck Creek area is really fascinating. The Quogue Ice Company actually used to be further down the creek when it was dammed at Montauk Highway, and they would harvest ice. Because of the dam being removed, that's when they had to move their location to the main site at Old Ice Pond, which we hiked around. So kind of interesting history there. But Phragmites you can see, but we have an osprey nest that usually fledged chicks from there at the osprey nest, and just a lot of really cool stuff to see when you visit Fairydale. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us at the Refuge. You can visit our website to learn more or follow us on social media on Instagram and Facebook. My email is right at the bottom of the screen. It's programs@quoguewildliferefuge.org. But we'd love to hear from you if you have any questions at all about visiting the refuge or about our program today. But very grateful that you tuned in, and please come and visit us. Again, the Refuge is a nonprofit nature preserve located in Quogue. We have a lot of information on our website, and we hope that you'll come hike or visit our animals soon.